At the will reading, my dad handed my sister a check for $12 million and tossed a single coin at me, saying, "Go earn your own." He thought he was teaching me a lesson about independence, but he did not know that the lawyer sitting next to him was holding a secret envelope from my grandfather, one that would send my mother screaming and put my father in handcuffs before dessert was served. My name is Nia, and this is how I took down my toxic family without shedding a single tear. Before we get into the drama, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours. The air conditioning in the conference room hummed with a sterile, expensive silence that made my skin crawl. We were seated around a mahogany table, long enough to land a plane on. At the head sat my father, Marcus, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. He looked every inch the self-made trucking magnate he claimed to be. To his right sat my mother, Beatrice, her face beat for the gods in full makeup, looking at me with that familiar mix of pity and disdain. And then there were the guests of honor. My younger sister Chantel and her husband Brad. Chantel was busy inspecting her acrylics, bored out of her mind, while Brad leaned back in his leather chair with an arrogant smirk that made me want to check my wallet. Brad was the kind of guy who used buzzwords like synergy and disruption, but had never worked a real day in his life. He was the golden addition to the family simply because he was white and knew how to flatter my father's massive ego. "We are here today because I have made a decision," my father announced, his voice booming off the glass walls. He loved the sound of his own voice almost as much as he loved money. "I am stepping down as CEO of M&B Logistics. It is time to pass the torch to the next generation to ensure our legacy of Black excellence continues for another 50 years. My mother clapped politely, her eyes shining with admiration. I stayed silent, my hands folded on the table. I knew what was coming. I had known it since I was 16, and they forgot to pick me up from debate camp because they were too busy buying Chantel a pony. My father slid a thick leather portfolio across the polished wood toward Chantel and Brad. Inside this folder are the transfer deeds for the company, the title to the estate in the Hamptons, and a cashier check for $12 million in liquid capital. He paused for dramatic effect. "Chantel, Brad, the empire is yours. Invest it, grow it, make me proud." Chantel squealed, snatching the folder like a toddler grabbing a candy bar. Brad pumped his fist and winked at my father. "You are the man, Marcus. We are going to take this thing to the moon. Crypto is the future, and we are going all in." My father nodded, beaming at them, like they had just cured cancer, instead of proposing to gamble the family fortune on internet coins. Then his gaze slid down the table to me. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold, hard look he reserved for business rivals and disappointing daughters. "And for you, Nia," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a single silver dollar coin and flicked it across the table. It spun on the mahogany surface with a harsh metallic ring, wobbling before finally settling in front of me. George Washington stared up at me, mocking my entire existence. "There it is," my father said, leaning back. $1. You always said you wanted to make it on your own right. You did not want our help. You did not want to follow our rules. So go ahead. Take that dollar and go earn your own millions. Show us what you are made of." The room erupted in laughter. My mother covered her mouth, giggling like a schoolgirl. Chantel pointed at the coin, shaking her head. "Oh my God, Dad, that is savage. Nia, you should frame it. Hang it in that little apartment of yours." Brad leaned forward, his elbows on the table, invading my personal space. "Hey, do not feel bad, Nia. Once we restructure the company, I am going to need a new personal assistant. You know, someone to fetch coffee, pick up my dry cleaning, maybe walk the dogs. Minimum wage, of course, but it is better than whatever you are doing now, right?" He looked around the table for approval, and my parents laughed harder, wiping tears from their eyes. I stared at the coin. I did not touch it. I did not blink. Inside my chest, a fire was raging, but on the outside, I was ice. They saw a daughter who had refused to join the family business to become a boring accountant. They saw a failure. What they did not see was that I was not just an accountant. I was a forensic accountant for one of the top firms in New York. I spent my days hunting down embezzlement fraud and tax evasion for Fortune 500 companies. I could trace a hidden asset through 6 shell companies before my morning coffee. And for the last 3 months I had been quietly looking into M&B logistics. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my suit. It was tailored Italian wool worth more than Brad's entire wardrobe, but to them it probably looked like a uniform. I picked up the silver dollar and slipped it into my pocket. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I will treasure this. But before I go and earn my own millions, I think there is something you should know about that 12 million you just gave them." My father frowned, his brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I am talking about the 3 sets of books you have been keeping, Marcus. I am talking about the creative accounting regarding the fuel subsidies in 2022. And I am definitely talking about the audit letter from the IRS that is currently sitting in your secretary's inbox marked urgent. You might want to check that before Brad invests your liquidity in crypto. Because according to my calculations, you do not have $12 million. You have about 6 months before the Fed sees everything." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The smile slid off Brad's face like grease. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. My father stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Get out!" he roared, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "You ungrateful, jealous little liar! Get out of my office and never come back! You are dead to us!" I smiled a genuine cold smile. I turned to leave, my heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. "Good luck with the audit, Dad," I called over my shoulder. "And Brad, I would not order that coffee just yet. You might need to save the money for a good lawyer." I walked out of the glass doors, leaving them in chaos. I had thrown the first punch, but I knew this was just the beginning. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Sterling, my grandfather's old lawyer. It read simply, "Come to my office. It is time for Plan B." I drove straight from my father's office to my apartment building in downtown Atlanta. It was a sleek high-rise that M&B Logistics owned and leased out to senior executives. For the last 3 years, living there had been part of my compensation package. But as I pressed my key fob against the electronic reader at the lobby door, the little light did not turn green. It flashed a harsh, angry red. Access denied. I tried again, thinking it was a glitch, but the result was the same. The doorman, heavy-set guy named Earl, who I had tipped every Christmas for 3 years, refused to meet my eye. He was staring intently at the floor, his posture stiff. I knew that look. It was the look of a man who had been given orders he hated, but could not afford to disobey. Before I could ask him what was going on, the elevator doors dinged open, and my mother Beatrice stepped out into the lobby. She was not alone. 2 heavy-duty black trash bags sat at her feet, bulging and misshapen. In one hand, she held her phone mounted on a stabilizer, holding it up at the perfect angle to catch the lobby lighting. She was live streaming. I could see the stream of hearts and angry face emojis floating up the side of her screen. "Here she is now, y'all," my mother announced to her 3,000 followers, her voice dripping with performative sadness. "The prodigal daughter returns. I told you guys I had to make a hard decision today as a mother. Sometimes you have to cut the branch to save the tree." She turned the camera toward me, zooming in on my face. Look at her standing there in that suit she probably bought with her daddy's money, expecting the world to just open its doors for her. "Well, not today, baby girl. Today you learn what the real world tastes like." She kicked one of the trash bags toward me. It slid across the polished marble floor with a pathetic scraping sound. "Here is your stuff, Nia. Or at least what I could fit in 2 bags. The rest is going to Goodwill. We need this unit for Brad. He needs a city pad for when he is closing big deals. You understand, right? Business is business." I felt a cold rage settling in my stomach, but my face remained a mask of indifference. She wanted a reaction. She wanted tears, screaming a meltdown that would boost her engagement numbers. I would rather die than give her that content. I looked at the bag, then at her. "You changed the locks, Mom." Illegal eviction is a crime in Georgia. You have to give 30 days notice. My mother laughed, a shrill sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged lobby. Listen to her, y'all. Always quoting rules, always trying to use the law to get her way, instead of just being a good daughter. This is company housing, Nia. And you were just fired. You are trespassing. Just then, my phone began to vibrate in my pocket. It was a dedicated ringtone, a sharp, urgent chime that I only assigned to my top-tier clients. I pulled it out. The caller ID read, District Attorney Hayes. My mother rolled her eyes. Who is calling you? Probably one of those little bill collectors already, or maybe your landlord telling you your credit score just dropped. I ignored her and swiped answer, putting the phone to my ear while staring her dead in the face. This is Nia. Nia, the voice on the other end was frantic. We are about to move on the Silver Lake embezzlement case. We need to know if you found the link between the offshore shell companies and the CEO's personal accounts. If we do not have the paper trail by 5, the judge won't sign the warrant. I kept my eyes locked on my mother as I spoke, my voice calm and authoritative. The voice of a woman who commands rooms my mother could not even get into. I sent the forensic analysis to your secure server 10 minutes ago. Look at page 42. The CEO tried to hide the assets in a crypto wallet under his mistress's name. But he made a mistake. He paid for the gas fees using his corporate card. It is all there. You have enough to indict him and seize his yacht. There was a pause on the line, then a sigh of relief. You are a genius, Nia. I do not know what we would do without you. I am authorizing your bonus immediately. Double the usual rate. I hung up the phone and slid it back into my pocket. My mother was staring at me. Her mouth slightly open, the live stream momentarily forgotten. What was that? She asked, her voice faltering for a split second. Who was that? Just work, I said casually, stepping over the trash bag she had kicked at me. You know that little job you think pays minimum wage? I just earned more in a 5-minute phone call than Brad has made in his entire life. My mother's face twisted. She recovered quickly, aiming the camera back at me. Lies. She is lying, y'all. She is just trying to save face because she is homeless. Look at her standing there with her trash bags. So sad. She reached down and grabbed the second bag, hauling it up. I had wrapped my grandmother's vintage quilt in that bag, the one thing I truly cared about. Beatrice knew it. She smiled a cruel, tight smile, and instead of handing it to me, she opened the lobby door and heaved the bag out onto the sidewalk. It landed in a puddle of dirty rainwater. Oops, she said into the camera. Butterfingers. Well, Nia, you better go get that before the garbage truck comes. It is trash day after all. I looked at the bag soaking in the street. Then I looked at my mother, a woman who cared more about the approval of strangers on the internet than the flesh and blood standing in front of her. I realized then that I was not losing a mother. I was shedding a parasite. I did not scream. I did not beg. I simply nodded. Enjoy the apartment, Mom, I said softly. I hope Brad likes it. I really do. Because he is going to need a comfortable place to stay when the feds come knocking for his father-in-law. I turned and walked out the door past Earl, who whispered, I am sorry, Miss Nia, as I passed. I picked up my wet bags from the sidewalk, not caring about the rain starting to fall. I dragged them to the curb, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I had just declared war. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I pulled it out expecting another client, or maybe my father screaming about me walking out. But it was a text from a number I did not have saved. I opened it. It was from Mr. Sterling, the old family lawyer. The message was short and chilling. Do not sign anything your father sends you. Do not go back to the office. Meet me at the diner on 4th and Main in 20 minutes. Bring the coin. I looked back at the building one last time, seeing my mother still filming in the window. I hailed a taxi and threw my bags in the back. The game had just changed, and I was done playing by their rules. I stood outside the gilded doors of the penthouse lounge at the Ritz. My sister Chantel had sent me a text 30 minutes ago. It was a picture of my forensic accounting license, the one I had worked 5 years to earn, sitting on a table next to a burning candle. The caption read, "Come get your trash before I turn it into wax art." It was a trap, obviously. A petty power play designed to drag me back into their orbit just to humiliate me one last time. But I needed that license. Replacing it would take weeks, and I had work to do. I smoothed my blazer, took a deep breath, and pushed open the doors. The noise hit me first. A wall of bass-heavy hip-hop and shrill laughter. The room was packed with people who looked like they were auditioning for a reality show about bad decisions. Crystal chandeliers vibrated with the music. In the center of the room stood a 6-foot-tall pyramid of champagne glasses, a monument to excess. Chantel was standing on a velvet riser next to it, holding court. She wore a dress that looked like it was made of diamonds and dental floss. When she saw me, her face lit up with a predatory glee. She clapped her hands, silencing the DJ. "Look, everyone, the party crasher has arrived," she announced into a microphone, her voice slurred. "My big sister, Nia. She came all this way just to wish us luck. Come here, Nia." I walked toward her, keeping my face neutral. "I just want my license, Chantel. Give it to me and I will leave." Chantel pouted, playing to the crowd. "Aw, she is all business. No fun at all. You want your little paper back. First you have to pay the toll." She gestured to a massive gold bottle of Ace of Spades champagne sitting on a table. "Since you are so good at handling things, why do not you pour the tower? We are too busy celebrating being rich to do manual labor." A ripple of laughter went through the room. Brad was standing by the bar, surrounded by a group of men in ill-fitting suits. He laughed the loudest, raising his glass to me. "Yeah, Nia, show us some skills. Try not to spill it. That bottle costs more than your car." I looked at the tower, then at my sister. She was holding my license over the candle flame, smiling. I had no choice. I walked over and picked up the heavy gold bottle. It was cold and slick with condensation. I climbed the small step stool, feeling the heat of 100 eyes on my back. As I began to pour the golden liquid into the top glass, watching it cascade down to the tiers below, I tuned out their jeers. I let my eyes wander. From my vantage point, I could see everything. I saw the way my mother was in the corner, frantically refreshing her social media feed, desperate for validation. But mostly I saw Brad. He was drunk, sloppy drunk. He had his arm around a guy I recognized as a local crypto scammer who had just been subpoenaed by the SEC last month. Brad was shouting over the music, oblivious to the fact that the room had quieted down to watch me pour. "12 million is just the start, baby," Brad yelled, slapping the bar top. "We are dumping the logistics cash into Lunacoin tonight. All of it. By Monday we double up. By Friday we buy the island." My hand froze for a fraction of a second. I poured carefully, ensuring not a drop was wasted while my mind raced. Lunacoin. He was talking about a pump and dump scheme that was already showing signs of collapse. He was going to liquidate the company's operating capital to buy magic beans. But then I saw it. To pay for the next round of drinks, Brad pulled a card from his wallet. It wasn't his personal debit card. It wasn't even the joint account card he shared with Chantel. It was black titanium. It caught the light as he waved it at the bartender. "Put it on the black card," he shouted. "M&B. Logistics pays for the party tonight, boys. Tax write-off." I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. That was the corporate Centurion card, the one strictly reserved for operational emergencies and fuel contracts. My father had authorized users for only 2 people, himself and his CFO. Brad shouldn't even be holding it, let alone using it to buy $50,000 worth of alcohol. This wasn't just bad judgment. This was embezzlement. This was wire fraud. This was a felony. I finished pouring the bottle. The crowd cheered, ironically clapping as if I had performed a circus trick. Chantel tossed my license onto the floor near my feet. Good job, helper. Now get out. You are ruining the vibe. I bent down and picked up my license, dusting it off. I didn't leave immediately. I walked toward the exit, which took me right past the bar. Brad was too busy high-fiving his crypto buddy to notice me. The black card was still sitting on the bar top next to a pile of signed receipts. I pretended to stumble, bumping into the bar. Oops, sorry, I muttered. Watch it, clumsy, Brad sneered, not even looking at me. In that second of distraction, I palmed my phone. I didn't just take a mental picture. I tapped the camera app and snapped 3 high-definition photos. One of the cards showing the numbers and the name on the front. One of the receipts showing the $20,000 tab he had just signed for. And one of the open laptop screen next to him, which showed a pending transfer of funds to an offshore crypto exchange. I also hit the voice memo button. Yeah, Marcus gave me the keys to the kingdom. Brad was bragging, his voice loud and clear. Old man thinks I am going to buy trucks. We are liquidating the fleet next week. Selling it for scrap. Who needs trucks when you have the blockchain? I slid the phone back into my pocket. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a steady drumbeat of victory. They thought they had humiliated me by making me serve them drinks. They didn't realize they had just served me their heads on a silver platter. I walked out of the penthouse without looking back. The cool night air hit my face, and I finally allowed myself to smile. I didn't just have evidence of incompetence. I had evidence of active criminal intent. I pulled out my phone and sent the photos to a secure cloud server. Then I texted Mr. Sterling. I have the smoking gun. Brad is embezzling the operating fund and liquidating assets. Meet me now. I hailed a cab. As I slid into the back seat, I looked up at the penthouse balcony. I could see the flashing lights and hear the bass thumping. They were dancing on the edge of a cliff, and they had no idea I was about to push them off. The driver looked in the rearview mirror. Where to miss? I looked at the digital copy of the receipt on my phone. The precinct, I said. I need to file a report. But first stop at a 24-hour coffee shop. I need to print some party favors for tomorrow. The 34th floor of the consulting firm was usually a sanctuary of hushed voices and the soft clicking of keyboards. It was a place where billion-dollar mistakes were corrected and corporate criminals were quietly dismantled. I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a subpoena for a fraud case in Chicago when the peace was shattered. I heard Sarah, my executive assistant, trying to be polite but firm outside my door. Her voice was rising in panic, but it was too late. The heavy oak doors to my office swung open with a bang that made my coffee jump in its mug. My mother marched in wearing a fur coat that was entirely too heavy for the Atlanta heat, trailing a cloud of expensive perfume that smelled like desperation. Chantel was right behind her, wearing sunglasses indoors and looking like she had just rolled out of bed at noon. They looked like they had wandered off the set of a reality show and gotten lost in a corporate law library. My colleagues in the glass-walled offices nearby stopped working and stared. Sign this, Beatrice demanded, slapping a document onto my desk right on top of my case files. Her face was tight with stress, the makeup settling into the fine lines around her mouth. The bank put a hold on the bridge loan because of some injunction filed this morning. Your father needs this money released by end of day to pay the vendors. Sign it and stop this tantrum immediately. I picked up the paper without standing. It was a waiver of interest, essentially signing away my right to contest any asset transfers from the family estate. It was a legal trap, and a clumsy one at that. I looked at my mother, calm and unbothered. I am not signing this, Mom. And you are trespassing. This is a secure building. Chantel scoffed, taking off her glasses to reveal eyes bloodshot from a night of partying. You are just jealous, Nia. You have always been jealous that Daddy loves me more. You sit in this boring office doing boring math while we are actually building an empire. You are trying to sabotage us because you are bitter and ugly inside. She reached out and swiped a crystal award from the edge of my desk. It was my Forensic Accountant of the Year trophy, heavy and expensive. It hit the floor with a sickening crunch, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. Oops, Chantel said, smirking. Put it on my tab. Oh wait, you do not have one. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I simply pressed the silent panic button mounted under my desk. "Security will be here in 60 seconds, I said, checking my watch, my voice devoid of emotion. "And since you just destroyed property worth over $500, that is a criminal misdemeanor in the state of Georgia. Plus, given the sensitive nature of the client files on my desk, your unauthorized presence here constitutes corporate espionage." My mother's eyes widened. "You would not dare call the police on your own mother. We are family, Nia. Stop this foolishness and sign the paper. Your father is stressed enough as it is." I leaned forward. "My father is stressed because he is a criminal mom, and you are an accomplice. I am not your daughter right now. I am a partner at this firm, and you are a liability." Two large uniformed security guards appeared in the doorway, filling the frame. They looked at the shattered glass and then at the two women. "Remove them," I said, returning my attention to my computer screen, "and call the Atlanta Police Department to file a report for property damage and harassment. I want a restraining order filed by lunch." "You ungrateful little witch," my mother screamed as one of the guards took her by the elbow. "We gave you life. We fed you." "I paid you back," I said softly, not looking up, with interest. Chantel began to shriek, kicking at the guard as they were forcibly escorted out of the office. The entire floor watched in stunned silence as the elevator doors finally closed on their cursing and threats. I took a deep breath and smoothed my skirt. Sarah rushed in looking mortified with a broom to sweep up the glass. "I am so sorry, Nia," she stammered. "They just barged past security downstairs." "It is fine, Sarah," I said. "Just add the cost of the award to my personal legal fund." The office slowly returned to its rhythm, but my heart was pounding. I knew that was just the opening salvo. They were desperate. The injunction Sterling filed had worked. It had frozen the money they needed to cover the holes Brad had dug. Then my desk phone rang. It was the private line, the one only immediate family had the number for. I stared at it for a second before hitting the speaker button. "Hello, Marcus," I said. There was a silence on the other end. No screaming, no blustering threats, just the sound of heavy, ragged breathing. When my father finally spoke, his voice was trembling like a leaf in a storm, stripped of all its usual arrogance. "Nia," he whispered, and I could hear the fear choking him. "The IRS just left the depot. They served me a paper. They are auditing everything, Nia. 7 years of back taxes. They froze the operating accounts." I leaned back in my chair, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "I know, Dad. What did you do?" he rasped. "What did you do to us?" "I did what you told me to do," I replied. "I went to work." "Good luck, Dad. You are going to need it." The silence in my office after my father hung up was heavy, but it was the silence of a predator who had finally trapped its prey. I did not sit back and enjoy the moment. I leaned forward and opened a secure, encrypted email channel. For the last 3 years, while my family mocked my career choice, I had been meticulously building a shadow file on M&B logistics. They called me boring. They called me a failure. They did not realize that while they were spending money, I was tracking it. I attached a 300-page PDF to a blank email addressed to the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. It was not a vague tip. It was a roadmap. I had highlighted every instance of tax fraud, every phantom employee on the payroll who turned out to be one of Chantel's friends, and every time Brad used company revenue to pay for personal luxury vacations disguised as business trips. I laid out the shell companies my father used to hide income and the offshore accounts where he stashed the skimming from the driver's pension funds. I hit send. The digital packet vanished into the ether, a guided missile headed straight for the heart of my father's empire. The reaction was almost immediate. I did not need to be in the room to see the panic. I could see it in the data. I still had access to the read-only view of the company's internal transaction logs, a backdoor I had installed years ago when I helped them set up their server. The screen lit up with red flags. The IRS moves fast when they have a roadmap. By noon, the primary operating accounts were frozen. By 1, the vendor payment started bouncing. My phone buzzed. It was not a call but a notification from a shared family cloud account my father had never bothered to remove me from. He was too technologically illiterate to understand that I could see his text messages. I opened the log. It was a stream of frantic, incoherent commands sent to Brad and Chantel. Liquidate everything he had texted. The feds are locking the main accounts. Get the cash out of the secondary reserves. Sell the crypto. Sell the cars if you have to. We need liquidity to run, or to bribe someone. I do not care, just get the money. I watched in real time as Brad and Chantel tried to obey. It was like watching rats on a sinking ship. They were hitting ATMs all over Atlanta trying to withdraw the daily maximums. They were trying to transfer funds from the Cayman accounts, but the SWIFT codes were already flagged. Every door they tried to open slammed shut in their faces. My father had built a house of cards, and I had just turned on the fan. But a cornered animal is dangerous, and my father was the most dangerous of all. He knew he could not touch the frozen assets, so he went for the only thing that was still liquid: the equity. I saw a notification pop up from the Fulton County Clerk's office. It was an alert I had set up 5 years ago on a specific property address. I assumed I would never see it trigger because the property was supposed to be untouchable. It was supposed to be sacred. I clicked the link, my heart rate spiking for the first time that day. A new lien had been recorded 45 minutes ago. A high-interest hard money loan. The kind of loan you get from sharks when the banks will not touch you. The borrower was Marcus Brooks. The collateral was 42 Magnolia Lane. I stopped breathing. 42 Magnolia Lane was not the sprawling mansion my parents lived in. It was not the glass warehouse downtown. It was a small, modest brick house on the edge of the city. It was the house my grandfather Otis had built with his own 2 hands when he came back from the war. It was the house where I learned to walk. It was the house where Grandpa Otis sat me on his knee and told me that integrity was the only currency that mattered. That house was held in a separate trust, meant to be preserved as a family museum, a sanctuary. My father was the trustee, but he had sworn on his father's grave never to leverage it. It was the one thing in the world that had sentimental value to me, and he had just mortgaged it to a predatory lender for quick cash. I refreshed the page. The loan amount was staggeringly high. He had pulled every cent of equity out of that house, likely to hand it over to Brad and Chantel so they could run or hide it before the audit was complete. He was selling his father's legacy to save his own skin. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of my desk. This was no longer just about justice or the company. This was a desecration. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He was willing to burn down the only pure thing our family had left, just to keep his golden child in designer shoes for another week. I picked up my phone and dialed Sterling. My voice was ice cold when he answered. He touched the house, I said. He mortgaged Grandpa Otis's home. I heard Sterling inhale sharply on the other end. That violates the primary covenant of the moral clause, he said. That is the final nail, Nia. I grabbed my keys and my bag. I am done waiting, I said. I am going to get that ledger, and then I am going to bury him. I pulled up to 42 Magnolia Lane expecting to find the quiet dignity of my childhood, but instead, I found a crime scene in progress. The lawn my grandfather used to mow with such pride every Saturday was overgrown, and there, plastered right in the center of the front door, was a neon orange sticker that screamed, "Foreclosure." My heart stopped beating for a second. It had only been a few hours since I saw the digital lien recorded, and the sharks were already circling. I stepped out of my car, my hand trembling as I reached for the notice. It was a notice of default. My father had not just mortgaged the house, he had leveraged it against a high-risk short-term loan that had immediate callback clauses. He had gambled the only thing that mattered to me. Before I could rip the sticker off, I heard the aggressive rumble of an engine. A matte black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the driveway, cutting across the grass and crushing my grandmother's azalea bushes. I instinctively ducked behind the massive oak tree in the front yard, the one I used to climb when I was 7 to hide from my mother's criticism. Brad stepped out of the driver's seat. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. His expensive suit was rumpled and sweat-stained, his usually perfectly gelled hair sticking up in odd angles. He opened the passenger door and a man stepped out. He did not look like a banker or a real estate agent. He wore a cheap suit that was too tight across his broad shoulders, and he scanned the neighborhood with cold, dead eyes that missed nothing. This was not an investor. This was muscle. I pulled out my phone and hit record, zooming in through the branches. The microphone picked up their voices clearly in the quiet afternoon air. "This is it," Brad said, his voice high and thready, waving a hand at the house. "It is prime real estate. Gentrification is hitting this zip code hard. You can flip it for 300 grand easy. Just take it as a down payment. Please." The man laughed, a dry, humorless sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. 300 grand, Brad. You are into us for 5 million. This little shack covers the interest for maybe 2 weeks. You told us you had 12 million coming yesterday. You said the old man was signing the check. Where is it? I froze. $5 million. Brad was not just investing in bad crypto schemes or failing at startups. He was in deep with loan sharks. The crypto talk was a buzzword salad to explain away the massive amounts of cash he was hemorrhaging. He was a degenerate gambling addict, and he had dragged my family into the pit with him. "It is coming," Brad pleaded, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "The IRS froze the operating accounts this morning. It is just a temporary hold. My father-in-law is fixing it. Marcus knows people. Once the accounts unlock, I will wire you the full amount, plus the VIG. Just do not hurt her. Do not tell Chantel." The man stepped closer, invading Brad's personal space, forcing him back against the car door. He poked a thick finger hard into Brad's chest. "We do not care about your wife, Brad. We care about our money. If that wire does not hit by Friday, we are not coming for the house. We are coming for your knees. And then we are going to pay a visit to that father-in-law of yours since he likes signing papers so much." Brad nodded vigorously, looking like he was about to be sick right there on the driveway. "I promise. Friday. Just take the deed to this place as a good faith token. Marcus signed it over this morning. It is clean." I felt a wave of nausea so strong I almost dropped my phone. My father had signed over his own father's home to a criminal to cover his son-in-law's gambling debts. He knew. Marcus knew Brad was in trouble, and instead of cutting him loose, he was feeding him the family legacy piece by piece to keep the illusion alive. The man snatched the folder Brad was holding. "We will check the title," he grunted. "If there is a single lien on this other than ours, you are dead." They turned back toward the car. I pressed myself against the rough bark of the oak tree, holding my breath, praying they would not see me. I had it. I had the confession. I had the motive. And I had the proof that my father was actively facilitating the payoff of illegal debts using family assets. This was not just incompetence anymore. It was conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. As the SUV roared away, leaving Brad standing alone and shaking in the driveway, I stopped the recording. My thumb hovered over the save button, sending a backup copy instantly to the cloud. I wasn't just going to save Grandpa's house, I was going to use it to bury them all. I waited until Brad got back into his car and sped off before I stepped out from behind the tree. I walked up to the front door and ripped the foreclosure notice off the wood. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket next to the silver dollar. I had everything I needed to pull the trigger on Will B, but first I needed to make sure the trap was inescapable. I sat in the back of a black sedan parked across the street from the St. Regis Hotel, watching the entrance like a hawk. Beside me sat a laptop glowing with a live audio feed. I wasn't just relying on luck anymore. I was manufacturing my own justice. Brad needed money fast to pay off the loan sharks who had threatened his knees and my father's house. He was desperate, and desperate men make fatal mistakes when they think they see a lifeline. I had constructed that lifeline out of smoke and mirrors. I had called in a favor from Elena, a senior partner at my firm, who specialized in undercover corporate espionage. Elena was terrifyingly beautiful and had a mind like a steel trap. Tonight she was playing the role of a high-flying crypto angel investor from Dubai, looking for a local partner to anchor a new decentralized finance protocol called the Obsidian Chain. It was completely fake. I had built the website myself in an hour using stock photos and buzzwords generated by an AI. It looked exactly like the kind of get-rich-quick scheme Brad worshipped. I watched on the monitor as Brad pulled up in his leased Porsche. He threw the keys to the valet with a trembling hand. He looked even worse than he had yesterday. His skin was pale and clammy, and he kept checking his phone every 3 seconds. He smoothed his suit jacket, took a deep breath, and walked into the hotel bar. I adjusted the volume on the receiver. The bug I had planted in his jacket pocket during the party scuffle was transmitting clearly. I could hear the clink of glass and the low hum of expensive conversation. Mr. Sterling, my lawyer, was on speakerphone in the car with me. "Are you sure about this?" "Nia," he asked. "This is entrapment if we are not careful. It is not entrapment if he walks into the trap willingly," I replied, my eyes fixed on the hotel doors. "I am not forcing him to steal. I am just giving him an opportunity to show us who he really is." Inside the bar, Elena was already seated in a private booth. I heard Brad approach. "Elena," he said, his voice pitching too high. "It is an honor. I have heard so much about the Obsidian project. Sit down, Brad." Elena said, her voice cool and commanding. "I do not have much time. My flight to Zurich leaves in 3 hours. I am looking for a lead investor for the North American seed round. Minimum buy-in is 5 million, but the projected yield is 40% by next quarter." I heard Brad inhale sharply. 40%. That solves all his problems. That pays the sharks, covers the theft from the logistics company, and leaves him with a profit to brag about. He was salivating. "I can handle that," Brad said quickly. "My family office manages substantial liquidity. We are moving assets around right now, actually. Restructuring." Elena played her part perfectly. "I need liquid cash, Brad. Wire transfer, no stocks, no bonds. And I need it by Tuesday. Can you authorize a transfer of that magnitude, or do I need to speak to Marcus?" "No," Brad practically shouted. "No, do not talk to Marcus. He is old school. He does not get the blockchain. I have full signatory power. I control the accounts." This was it, the confession. "So you are committing $5 million of M&B Logistics operating capital to this venture," Elena clarified. "Absolutely," Brad said. "The money is there. I just need to clear a few red tape hurdles with the IRS audit, but that is just noise. I will wire the $5 million on Monday morning. Consider it done." I hit the save button on the recording software. Got him. He had just committed to wire fraud and unauthorized use of corporate funds on tape. He had explicitly stated he would bypass the CEO to move millions into a speculative asset. This proved he wasn't just incompetent, he was rogue. "Excellent," Elena said. "I will have my lawyers draft the letter of intent. Welcome to the future, Brad." I saw Brad stumble out of the hotel 10 minutes later, looking like he had just won the lottery. He was punching the air and laughing to himself. He thought he was saved. He thought he was a genius. He had no idea he had just promised $5 million he didn't have to a woman who didn't exist for a company that wasn't real. But then the complication arrived. A complication wearing a red trench coat and driving a white Range Rover. Chantel. My sister screeched to a halt in the loading zone right behind Brad's Porsche. She didn't get out immediately. She sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. She had been tracking him. She must have seen the withdrawal attempts or the weird location pings on his phone. From her vantage point, she couldn't see the business meeting. She just saw her husband walking out of a luxury hotel bar, looking flushed and excited after meeting a stunning woman in a low-cut dress. Elena walked out a moment later, getting into a waiting town car. Brad watched her go a little too lingeringly. I saw Chantel's face through her windshield. It wasn't the face of a woman worried about finances. It was the face of a woman scorned. Her eyes narrowed into slits. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of Elena's car and then a picture of Brad standing there grinning like an idiot. She didn't get out and confront him. She didn't scream. She put the car in gear and peeled away aggressively, cutting across 3 lanes of traffic. I sat back in my seat stunned. Chantel didn't know about the loan sharks, or the fake investment. She thought Brad was having an affair. She thought he was spending their inheritance on a mistress. This changed everything. I didn't just have legal leverage anymore. I had emotional dynamite. Chantel was jealous, possessive, and petty. If she thought Brad was cheating, she wouldn't just divorce him. She would destroy him. And in her rage, she would tear down the wall of silence protecting my father. I watched Brad get into his car, oblivious to the fact that his wife was currently plotting his murder. The pieces were all on the board: the fake investment, the loan sharks, the jealous wife, and the audit. All I had to do was light the fuse. I picked up my phone and texted Sterling. "We have the confession, and we have something better. We have a distracted enemy. Prepare the documents for the gala. We are going to end this tomorrow night." I parked my rental car at the bottom of the driveway of the estate. The foreclosure notice I had ripped down was burning a hole in my pocket, but I knew my father had probably already replaced it with a bribe to the sheriff or a lie to my mother. I walked up the stone steps past the marble lions that always looked too pretentious for a trucking family from Atlanta. I found my mother in the sunroom. She was surrounded by dress bags and fabric swatches, preparing for the signing gala tomorrow night. She looked up as I entered, and her face hardened into a mask of irritation. "What are you doing here, Nia?" she asked, not even putting down her glass of iced tea. "If you are here to apologize for the scene at your office, you can save it. Your father is still furious." "I am not here to apologize, Mom," I said, walking over to the glass table. I placed a manila envelope on top of her silk swatches. "I am here to give you one last chance to get off the sinking ship." She laughed, a brittle sound that cracked the air. "Sinking ship? Honey, we are about to sign a deal that will make us royalty. Brad has secured an international investor. We are expanding. Brad is stealing from you," I said, my voice flat and hard. I opened the envelope and spread the photos out. There was Brad shaking hands with the loan shark. There was the transcript of his conversation with Elena promising $5 million of company money to a fake crypto scheme. There was the lien on Grandpa Otis' house. "Look at them, Mom," I urged. "He is not investing. He is paying off gambling debts. He is drowning, and he is using Dad's company as a life raft. And Dad knows. Dad is mortgaging the legacy just to keep the lights on for another week." Beatrice did not look at the photos. She swept her arm across the table, sending the evidence fluttering to the floor like dead leaves. She stood up, her eyes blazing with a fury that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with pride. "Stop it," she screamed. "Just stop it. I am so sick of your jealousy, Nia. It is a sickness. You cannot stand that your sister is happy. You cannot stand that she found a man who dreams big while you are stuck counting other people's pennies. He is a con artist, Mom." I pushed back, stepping closer. "He has a wife and kids in Ohio. He is using Chantel. He is using you." That was the trigger. My mother stepped forward and slapped me. It wasn't a theatrical slap. It was a hard, vicious strike that snapped my head to the side and left my cheek burning. The sound echoed in the sunroom, silencing the birds outside. "You shut your mouth," she hissed, leaning into my face. "Brad is a successful white businessman. He has connections you could only dream of. He is going to elevate this family to places your grandfather never could. You are just bitter because you are alone and Chantel has a partner who builds empires. You have no class, Nia. You never did. You are just like those people who want to tear down Black success because you are too lazy to build your own." I slowly turned my head back to look at her. I touched my cheek. It throbbed, but the pain felt distant. In that moment, the last tether of guilt snapped. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, who was standing there defending a thief because he fit the aesthetic she craved. She didn't care about the truth. She cared about the picture on the Christmas card. She cared about the gala. She cared about the lie. I realized then that I couldn't save her. You cannot save someone who is in love with their own chains. "Okay, Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but steady as a rock. I tried. Remember that. When the lights go out and the bank takes this house, remember that I tried to tell you? I did not wait for her response. I turned and walked out of the sunroom, leaving the photos scattered on the floor. I walked through the house that was built on fraud and denial, and out the front door. The humidity of the Georgia afternoon hit me, but I felt cold inside. I got into my car and locked the doors. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from Mr. Sterling. I opened it. The message was short. The affidavit is signed. We have the proof of the mortgage fraud and the wiretap authorization. Will B is active. The gala starts at 7 tomorrow. That is our window. I looked back at the house one last time. I could see my mother moving in the window, probably calling Chantel to complain about me. She had no idea. She thought she was preparing for a coronation. She didn't know she was dressing for a funeral. I started the engine. I am ready, Mr. Sterling, I dictated into the phone. Let's burn it down. I was sitting in my car, still parked at the end of the driveway, when my phone chimed again. It was an email from the private investigator I had hired 3 days ago. The subject line read simply, "Red flag." I opened the attachment, expecting to see more gambling debts, or maybe another loan shark connection. What I saw made my blood run cold and then boil with a fierce vindication. The file contained a marriage certificate dated 6 years ago from Franklin County, Ohio. It listed a Bradley Thomas Miller marrying a Sarah Jean Jenkins. There was no divorce decree attached. Instead, there were birth certificates for 2 children aged 4 and 2. The father was listed as Bradley Thomas Miller. I scrolled down. There were photo surveillance shots taken just yesterday. They showed a modest suburban house in Columbus with a minivan in the driveway. In one photo, a woman who looked tired but kind was carrying groceries. In another, a man who looked exactly like my brother-in-law, Brad, was playing catch with a little boy in the front yard. But the timestamp on the photo was from 3 months ago. The investigator's notes were meticulous. Subject maintains a secondary residence in Ohio. Neighbors confirm he travels frequently for business, but is home at least 1 weekend a month. Wife believes he is a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. No knowledge of Atlanta residence or second marriage. Brad wasn't just a thief or a gambler. He was a bigamist. He was living a double life, playing house with my sister in Atlanta, while maintaining a secret family in Ohio. He wasn't just scamming my father, he was scamming 2 women simultaneously. I stared at the photo of the little boy. He had Brad's chin. This man was a monster. He was using my family's money not just to cover his debts, but to support a lie so massive it spanned state lines. I felt a surge of nausea. Chantel was annoying, selfish, and blinded by greed, but she didn't deserve this. No one did. She thought she had married a prince. She had married a predator. I downloaded the file to my secure drive and then forwarded a copy to Sterling. I added a note: "Do not use this yet. This is the nuclear option." I sat there for a moment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the Georgia sky in bruised purples and angry oranges. I had everything I needed. I had the financial fraud, the mortgage lien, the fake investment entrapment, and now the secret family. I held the power to destroy Brad completely. I could send him to prison for decades. But I also held the power to shatter my sister's world. When I revealed this, it wouldn't just be about money anymore. It would be about her heart, her pride, her entire reality. She would be humiliated on a level I couldn't even imagine. I thought about the slap my mother had just given me. I thought about the way Chantel had laughed when Dad threw the coin at me. I thought about them kicking me out of my apartment. They wanted a show. They wanted a gala. They wanted to celebrate their success and rub my nose in it. Well, I was going to give them a show they would never forget. I started the car and drove away from the estate. The city lights of Atlanta twinkled in the distance, indifferent to the storm that was about to break. I drove to a small 24-hour print shop on the outskirts of town. I didn't trust my office printer, and I certainly didn't trust the cloud. I needed physical copies. high-resolution, glossy, undeniable. I spent an hour printing and collating. I made packets, one for the IRS, one for the SEC, one for the local police, and one very special packet bound in a red folder just for Chantel. As I walked out of the shop, the air was thick and heavy, the kind of atmosphere that precedes a tornado. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a reminder notification I had set weeks ago, back when I still thought I might be part of the family. Reminder: M&B Logistics Signing Gala. 7 p.m. The Grand Ballroom. I swiped the notification away. I wouldn't need a reminder. I checked my watch. It was midnight. The gala was less than 20 hours away. I went back to my hotel room, but I didn't sleep. I laid out my suit, the one I would wear to the execution. It was black, sharp, and tailored to perfection. I polished my shoes until I could see my reflection in them. I looked calm. I looked ready. Tomorrow night the champagne would flow, the music would play. My father would make a speech about legacy. Brad would smile his charming, lying smile, and then I would walk in. I turned off the lamp and stared into the darkness. The coin in my pocket felt heavy, warm, and vibrating with potential energy. It was time to cash it in. The countdown had begun. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was draped in white silk and suffocating denial. My father had pulled out every stop to make this night look like a coronation, rather than a desperate attempt to cover a crime scene. From the live feed on my laptop, I could see the layout clearly. There were ice sculptures in the shape of semi-trucks, towering centerpieces of imported orchids, and a 10-tier cake that probably cost more than my first year of college tuition. It was a spectacle designed to dazzle the bankers and investors into forgetting that M&B Logistics was bleeding cash. My father Marcus was sweating through his tuxedo, shaking hands with a manic energy that bordered on hysteria. Beside him, my mother Beatrice wore a gown that sparkled under the chandeliers, her smile fixed and brittle as she scanned the room for anyone who might whisper the word audit. I watched all of this from the back seat of a black armored SUV that smelled of leather and inevitability. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer. Tonight, I wasn't wearing the sensible work clothes my family mocked. I was wearing a suit that cost $5,000, tailored to a razor's edge. It was armor. Beside me sat Mr. Sterling, looking like an old lion ready for one last hunt. And in the front seat sat Special Agent Miller and his partner from the FBI's white-collar crimes division. We were parked just around the corner, waiting for the right moment. The invitation list for tonight was exclusive, but there was one name conspicuously absent: mine. My mother had not just uninvited me, she had militarized the entrance. Through my surveillance, I knew she had hired a private security firm specifically to keep me out. She had given them my photo. I could practically hear her voice instructing them. "If you see her, do not let her in. She is disturbed. She is jealous. Drag her out if you have to." They thought a clipboard and a bouncer could stop me. They thought I was just an angry daughter trying to crash a party. They didn't know about the briefcase resting on my lap. Inside that briefcase was the final secret my grandfather Otis had kept hidden for 30 years. It wasn't just a will, it was a corporate charter. When Otis founded the company, he didn't trust his son's judgment even then. He created a special class of equity, Class C shadow shares. These shares did not appear on the standard operating ledger. They did not pay dividends, and they did not have voting rights under normal circumstances. To the outside world, they were ghosts. But grandfather had written a trigger clause into the corporate bylaws. In the event that the CEO attempts to liquidate core assets without unanimous family consent, or if the company faces federal indictment, these shadow shares instantly convert into super voting stock with veto power over the board. There were 40,000 shares. My father owned none of them. My mother owned none. Chantel certainly owned none. Grandfather had left every single one of them to me. For years I had held these certificates, knowing they were worthless paper unless my father crossed a line. When he mortgaged the family home and cooked the books to hide Brad's theft, he didn't just break the law. He pulled the trigger on my inheritance. As of this morning, when Sterling filed the emergency motion with the state, I wasn't just an employee or a daughter. I legally owned 40% of M&B Logistics. And with the super voting rights activated, I had the power to dissolve the board, fire the CEO, and liquidate the company. I didn't need an invitation. I owned the party. I checked my watch, 7:15. The guests would be seated, the speeches would be starting. My father would be standing at the podium lying to everyone about the bright future of the company, while Brad stood beside him, trying to look like he hadn't just promised $5 million of stolen money to a fake investor. "Let's go," I said, my voice calm in the quiet car. The driver nodded and pulled the SUV out into traffic, gliding up to the hotel entrance. We bypassed the line of luxury sedans and limousines pulling right up to the red carpet. The valet looked confused, stepping forward to open the door, but Agent Miller flashed his badge through the window, and the valet stepped back quickly. I stepped out of the car. The evening air was cool, but I didn't feel it. I felt the weight of the silver dollar in my pocket. I felt the heavy leather handle of the briefcase in my hand. Sterling climbed out beside me, buttoning his jacket. The two FBI agents flanked us, moving with the professional efficiency of men who were used to ruining rich people's nights. We walked toward the double doors. The head of the private security team, a man with a thick neck and a clipboard, spotted me immediately. He recognized me from the photo my mother had given him. He stepped into my path, his hand raised, palm out. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble intended to intimidate, "you are not on the list. I have strict instructions from Mrs. Brooks that you are to be removed from the premises immediately. Please step back or I will have to escort you off the property." I didn't stop walking. I didn't even slow down. I walked straight up to him until I was inches from his chest. I looked him in the eye and smiled a cold, sharp smile. "Move," I said softly. He blinked, taken aback by my lack of fear. "Ma'am, I am telling you to leave. If you cause a scene, I will—" "I am not a guest," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the hotel lobby. "And you do not work for Beatrice Brooks. You work for M&B Logistics, the company that pays your invoice." I lifted the briefcase slightly. "I am the majority shareholder of this company. I am the only person in this building who can authorize your paycheck next week. So unless you want to be unemployed by midnight, you will step aside and open those doors." The guard hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the grim-faced men standing behind me. He saw Sterling's expensive suit. He saw the earpieces and the badges on the FBI agents. He did the math. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a federal raid. He stepped aside. "Thank you," I said, stepping past him. Sterling pushed open the heavy double doors to the ballroom. The sound of applause washed over us. My father was on stage holding a microphone, a glass of champagne raised high. To the future he was booming, his face slick with sweat and triumph. To family. To legacy. The doors slammed open behind me, echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous room. The applause faltered. Heads turned. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd as hundreds of eyes landed on the small group standing in the doorway. My father froze mid-toast. The glass trembled in his hand. My mother, who had been beaming at the front table, stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Chantel dropped her fork. Brad looked like he was about to vomit. I walked into the room, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I didn't look at the guests. I kept my eyes locked on the stage. I walked straight down the center aisle, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. Sterling was right beside me and the FBI agents fanned out, blocking the exits. The silence was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the sculptures. "Nia," my father whispered into the microphone, his voice amplified and trembling. "What are you doing here?" I stopped at the foot of the stage. I looked up at him, at the man who had thrown a coin at me and told me to make my own way. "I am here to accept your challenge, Dad," I said, my voice carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. "You told me to earn my own, So I did. I earned this company, and now I am here to take it back. The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung inward with a groaning weight that sounded like the lid of a coffin being pried open. The air inside was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the metallic tang of fear. I stepped across the threshold and the atmosphere in the room shattered instantly. The ambient hum of polite conversation and clinking crystal vanished, replaced by a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents high above in the vaulted ceiling. I walked forward. My heels struck the marble floor with a rhythmic, deliberate cadence that echoed like a metronome counting down the seconds of my father's career. To my left, Mr. Sterling moved with the grace of a man who had waited 20 years for this specific moment. To my right, the two FBI agents scanned the room, not looking at the guests but looking for threats and flight risks. They were sharks swimming through a tank of tropical fish. A junior security guard who had not received the memo from his boss at the front entrance stepped into my path near the coat check. He was young, beefy, and clearly eager to earn his paycheck. He reached for my arm, his face set in a professional scowl. "Ma'am, this is a private event, you need to." Mr. Sterling did not even slow down. He whipped a document out of his breast pocket and held it up. The paper bore the crimson seal of the Federal District Court of Georgia. "This is a federal injunction and a writ of entry issued by Judge Patterson Sterling," said his voice low but cutting. "If you touch her, you are interfering with a federal investigation. Step aside, son, before you ruin your life." The young guard froze, his eyes darting to the badges clipped to the belts of the agents behind us. He looked at the seal, then at me. He swallowed hard and backed away, melting into the shadows. The path to the stage was clear. I kept walking. I could feel the eyes of every person in the room on me. These were not just friends and family. These were the power players of Atlanta. The bankers who held my father's loans, the investors Brad was trying to swindle, and the society matrons my mother was desperate to impress. They watched with open mouths as the exiled daughter returned with a federal escort. I saw Mrs. Vanderhoven, the chair of the charity board, whisper something to her husband, who immediately put down his champagne glass and reached for his phone. The gossip was already spreading faster than the virus my father had become. On the stage, my father stood frozen. The microphone was still clutched in his hand, his knuckles white. He looked like a statue of a man crumbling from the inside out. His eyes were wide, fixed on me with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Beside him, my mother Beatrice had turned a shade of pale that clashed horribly with her gold-sequined gown. She clutched her chest as if she were having palpitations, but I knew it was just performance art. She was calculating how to spin this, how to make herself the victim. Chantel was the first to react. She stood up from the head table, her chair screeching against the floor. She looked at me, and then at the briefcase in my hand. She did not know what was inside, but she knew it was dangerous. She looked at Brad for support, but Brad was busy staring at the FBI agents. He had recognized them. I saw the color drain from his face, leaving him looking like wet dough. He knew. In that split second, he knew the game was over. He started to back away, moving slowly toward the side exit leading to the kitchen. Agent Miller noticed immediately. He didn't run. He just turned his head and locked eyes with Brad, raising one eyebrow. It was a silent command. "Don't even think about it." Brad froze, his legs shaking visibly beneath the table. I reached the foot of the stage. The music had stopped. The band was watching, uncertain whether to play or pack up. I looked up at my father. Up close, I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. I could see the tremor in his hand. He looked small. For my entire life he had been a giant, a titan who controlled my world with a word or a checkbook. Now he was just a scared old man in a rented tuxedo, standing on a stage he could no longer afford. He lowered the microphone slightly, his voice cracking as he spoke without amplification, but in the dead silence of the room, everyone heard him. "Nia, He rasped, his voice trembling with a cocktail of rage and fear. "What are you doing here?" I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I did not climb up to join him. I did not need to be on his level. I was the foundation now. I lifted the leather briefcase, slightly letting the light catch the brass buckles. "I am here to accept your challenge, Dad," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying to the back of the room. "You told me to earn my own way. You told me to build my own empire. Well, I did. And along the way I found the pieces of the one you broke." I took a step closer, my eyes locking with his. "I am here to claim my inheritance, Marcus. Not the one you stole. The one Grandpa Otis left for me. The one you tried to bury under mortgage fraud and fake ledgers. I am here to take back my company, my house, and my name." My mother let out a strangled gasp. Chantel shouted something unintelligible, a shrill cry of protest. My father opened his mouth to speak, to scream, to deny it, to call security, but his hand squeezed the microphone too hard. The feedback loop screamed through the speakers, a high-pitched, ear-splitting screech that made everyone in the room cover their ears. It was the sound of a system failing, the sound of an empire collapsing. The noise died down, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. My father stood there, panting, the microphone now useless in his hand. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw him realize that he wasn't the smartest person in the room. He was just the defendant. Part 13 of the script in English. Following the style and constraints, Mr. Sterling did not wait for the echo of the feedback to die down completely before he stepped onto the stage. He moved past my father as if Marcus were merely an inconvenient piece of furniture placed in a hallway. Sterling placed his heavy leather briefcase on the podium right next to the champagne glass my father had abandoned. The click of the brass latches opening sounded like 2 gunshots in the silent room. He pulled out a document that looked old, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges and protected by a plastic sleeve. It commanded respect just by existing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling began, his voice projecting effortlessly to the back of the room without the need for the microphone. "I am Arthur Sterling, personal counsel to the late Otis Brooks. Many of you knew Otis. You knew him as a man of honor, a man who built this company with sweat and integrity. What you did not know is that Otis prepared for this exact day 20 years ago." He held up the document for the room to see. The silence was so profound, I could hear the ice shifting in the glasses of the bankers in the front row. My father made a sudden move to grab the paper, his hand darting out like a desperate claw. But Agent Miller stepped forward from the shadows, his hand resting casually near his waist. My father froze, shrinking back into himself, his bravado dissolving into terror. "This is the conditional codicil to the last will and testament of Otis Brooks," Sterling continued, his tone clinical and sharp. "It is what we call a springing trust. It was designed to remain dormant unless specific conditions were met. Conditions that constituted a betrayal of the company's core values." Sterling looked down at the paper, reading through his half-moon glasses. The clause reads as follows: "Should my successor, Marcus Brooks, attempt to encumber, sell, or leverage the ancestral property located at 42 Magnolia Lane, or should he be found complicit in the misappropriation of company funds for personal gain, his executive authority is immediately revoked. Furthermore, all assets previously held in his name, including the controlling interest in M&B Logistics, shall revert to the blind trust established for the protection of the Brooks legacy." A gasp rippled through the room like a physical wave. I saw Mrs. Vanderhoven cover her mouth with a gloved hand. The bankers were already texting furiously on their phones, realizing that the loans they had given my father were backed by assets he no longer legally owned. It meant the house of cards had just collapsed in real time. Sterling turned the page with a deliberate crinkle. "The sole trustee of this fund, and the only individual with the authority to dissolve or restructure M&B Logistics, shall be the grandchild who has demonstrated fiscal responsibility and independence, the grandchild who holds the silver dollar token of the founder." Sterling looked up, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. "That individual is Nia Brooks." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Grandpa Otis had given me the keys to the kingdom before I was even old enough to drive. He had watched me. He had known. My father looked like he had been punched in the gut. He slumped against the podium, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. My mother was shaking her head, muttering no over and over again, her eyes wide and unseeing. But it was Chantel who broke the silence. The reality of what Sterling had just said pierced through her haze of entitlement and greed. She realized in that second that the $12 million she had spent in her head was gone. The private jet trips, the clothes, the mansion, it was all smoke. No, Chantel screamed. The sound tore through the room, shrill and ugly. She rushed the stage, her heels catching on the carpet, stumbling, but catching herself. That is a lie. That is fake. You forged it. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She is a liar. She is just a jealous, bitter accountant. Grandpa never left her anything. He hated her. He gave everything to Daddy. This is a trick. Sterling looked down at her with cool, professional pity. This document was notarized and filed with the state Supreme Court 20 years ago, Mrs. Miller. It has been sitting in a sealed vault, waiting for your father to make a mistake. And when he signed that mortgage on the Magnolia Lane house yesterday, he signed his own resignation. It is not fair, Chantel shrieked, stomping her foot like a toddler denied a toy. I am the heir. Daddy said it was mine. We have plans. We have investors. You cannot just take it away because of some stupid piece of paper. It is not your money, Chantel, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. It never was. It was Grandpa's money, and you and Brad were just stealing it one crypto scam at a time. Liar, she screamed, lunging toward me. You just want to ruin my life. You want Brad. You have always wanted him. I almost laughed. The delusion was breathtaking. I did not want her husband. I wanted justice. Agent Miller stepped in front of me, blocking Chantel's path. She slammed into his chest and bounced back, losing her balance and falling to the marble floor in a heap of expensive silk and fake tan. Brad, who had been trying to blend into the curtains, saw his wife fall. He didn't move to help her. He didn't rush to her side. He looked at the exit again, calculating his odds. He realized that the check for $12 million was never going to clear. He realized the loan sharks were going to be very disappointed on Friday. Sterling closed the folder with a final snap. The transfer of assets is effective immediately. All accounts associated with M&B Logistics have been frozen pending a forensic audit. Security will now escort all non-essential personnel from the building. My father looked up, his eyes hollow. You cannot do this, Nia, he whispered. We are family. I looked at him standing there in the ruins of his own making. I touched the silver dollar in my pocket. You should have thought about that before you gave my inheritance to a con artist, Dad, I said. You told me to go earn my own. I just did. The room erupted into chaos. The press was shouting questions. The investors were shouting at my father. And in the center of it all, Chantel sat on the floor sobbing, not for her father, not for her husband, but for the money she would never touch. I walked over to the audiovisual control panel at the side of the stage, my movements deliberate and calm amidst the rising murmurs of the crowd. The band had stopped playing entirely, the drummer sitting with his sticks frozen in midair, staring at the drama unfolding center stage. My father was clutching the podium like a lifeline, his face a mask of gray ash. Chantel was still on the floor, her expensive dress ruined, sobbing into her hands, but nobody was looking at her anymore. They were looking at me. I plugged my laptop into the HDMI port. The massive projection screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of flattering photos of my father and Brad, shaking hands, flickered and went black. A second later it roared to life with a high-definition spreadsheet that was bright enough to blind. You wanted to talk about legacy, Dad, I said into the silence, my voice amplifying through the sound system again. You wanted to talk about building an empire. Let us look at the foundation of that empire. I clicked a button on my remote. The spreadsheet highlighted a series of transactions in red. These were the withdrawals from the M&B Logistics Employee Pension Fund. the fund that was supposed to secure the retirement of the 300 drivers and warehouse workers who broke their backs for this family. The fund that was federally protected. According to these transfers dated over the last 18 months, $4 million was moved out of the pension trust, I explained, pointing at the screen. It was labeled as administrative consulting fees paid to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called C&B Holdings. I clicked again. A new slide appeared. It showed the incorporation papers for C&B Holdings. The signatories were Marcus Brooks and Chantel Miller. And here is where that money went, I continued. I pulled up credit card statements linked to the shell company. The crowd gasped. It was a shopping list of excess, a $200,000 Bentley leased in Brad's name, weekly 5-figure spending sprees at Gucci and Louis Vuitton, first-class tickets to Dubai and Paris, a $50,000 invoice for the very party we were standing in. You stole the retirement savings of your own employees to buy purses and throw parties, I said, my voice cold with disgust. You hollowed out the future of men and women who trusted you just so Chantel could play pretend princess on Instagram. The reaction in the room was visceral. The bankers in the front row stood up, their faces flushed with anger. These were men who managed risk for a living, and they had just realized they were holding toxic assets. One of the investors, a man who had put $2 million into the company last year, started shouting, "Is this true, Marcus? Did you touch the pension fund? That is federal prison time. I want my capital out. I want out now." My father tried to speak, but no words came out. His knees finally gave way. He didn't fall dramatically, he just crumpled, sliding down the side of the podium until he hit the chair behind him. He sat there staring at the screen, seeing his crimes illuminated in 40-foot letters. He looked small. He looked old. He looked like a man who knew his life was over. The room descended into a frenzy. People were pulling out phones, calling lawyers, calling partners. The board members who were present were trying to distance themselves, backing away from the table where my mother sat frozen in horror. She was looking at the screen, seeing the receipts for jewelry she thought my father had bought with profits, realizing it was all stolen money. I watched the chaos unfold, feeling a grim satisfaction. This was the cleansing fire. It was burning down the lies, but it was necessary. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the heavy velvet drapes covering the service exit. It was Brad. He was moving with the stealth of a cockroach when the lights come on. He had abandoned Chantel on the floor. He had abandoned my father in the chair. He was trying to slip out the side door, hoping that in the confusion everyone would focus on Marcus and forget about the son-in-law who had facilitated the whole thing. He had almost made it. His hand was reaching for the brass handle of the door. He looked back, once his eyes wide with panic meeting mine across the room. He thought he could just run back to Ohio. He thought he could disappear into his other life. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time. "Going somewhere, Brad?" I asked. The sound of his name froze him in place. The room quieted down again, the attention shifting from the broken man on stage to the rat trying to flee the ship. Brad turned slowly, his face pale and sweating. He tried to summon some of his usual arrogance, but it fell flat. "I am just going to call my lawyer, Nia," he stammered, his voice cracking. "This is a misunderstanding. I need to clear this up." I clicked the remote one more time. The screen behind me changed. Gone were the spreadsheets. Gone were the bank statements. In their place was a live feed from a social media platform. It was a live stream. And on the screen, watching with a look of absolute devastation, was a woman sitting in a modest living room in Columbus, Ohio. She was holding a toddler on her lap, and a 4-year-old boy was sitting next to her. "You do not need to call a lawyer, Brad," I said, my voice soft, but carrying a weight that crushed him. "You need to call your wife, Sarah. She is watching right now. And I think she has a few questions about why her husband, who is supposed to be a pharmaceutical sales rep on a business trip, is wearing a tuxedo at a gala in Atlanta with another woman who thinks she is his wife." Brad looked at the screen. He saw Sarah. He saw his children. And for the first time all night, the arrogance finally died. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Chantel, who had stopped crying and was staring at the screen with her mouth open. He looked at the floor, defeated. The trap had snapped shut. There was nowhere left to run. The image of Sarah sitting in her living room in Ohio faded from the screen, but the devastation it left behind hung in the air like smoke. I clicked the remote one more time, and a new document appeared. It was a marriage license dated 6 years ago from Franklin County. It listed Bradley Thomas Miller and Sarah Jean Jenkins. There was no divorce decree, there was no separation agreement, there was only a lie that had spanned 2 states and destroyed 2 families. Chantel was staring at the screen, her eyes darting back and forth as if reading the words would make them disappear. She stood up slowly, her ruined dress trailing on the floor. Her hands were shaking so badly her diamond bracelets rattled like wind chimes. She looked at Brad, who was still frozen near the exit, his face a portrait of absolute terror. "You are married," Chantel whispered, her voice trembling. "You told me you were single. You told me you were a tech prodigy from Silicon Valley. You told me you sold your first startup for $50 million. I walked down the steps of the stage, moving toward them. "He did not sell anything, Chantel," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "Unless you count selling you a fantasy." I clicked the remote again. A series of screenshots appeared. They were text messages. Brutal, desperate messages from a number listed as Loan Shark 1. "Pay up, Miller, or we take a finger." One message read, "You have until Friday, or we come to the house." Another threatened. "He is not a millionaire, Chantel," I continued relentlessly. "He is a gambling addict who owes $5 million to the kind of people who do not send demand letters. He married you because he needed a piggy bank. He needed daddy's money to save his own skin. He has been using you." The reality hit Chantel like a physical blow. The illusion of her perfect life, the envy she thought she inspired in me, the superiority she felt, it all shattered. And beneath it she found a rage so pure it was terrifying. She let out a scream that sounded more animal than human. "You liar!" she shrieked. She launched herself at him. It was not a graceful attack. It was a whirlwind of acrylic nails and fury. She clawed at his face, tearing at his skin, ripping his tuxedo jacket. "You said we were going to buy an island," she screamed, striking him over and over. "You said I was going to be a queen. You stole from me. You made me look stupid." Brad tried to fend her off, pushing her away, but he was weak, panic sapping his strength. "Get off me, you crazy witch," he yelled, stumbling back into a table of champagne flutes, sending them crashing to the floor. Agent Miller stepped forward, signaling to the back of the room. The doors swung open again, and 4 uniformed officers marched in. They did not look like they were there to break up a domestic dispute. They looked like they were there to take out the trash. They pulled Chantel off of him. She was sobbing now, hyperventilating, her makeup smeared across her face in dark streaks. Brad straightened his torn jacket, trying to regain some shred of dignity, but it was too late. He looked at the officers and then at me. "You set me up," he hissed. "That investment, the crypto deal. It was you." I smiled, cold and satisfied. "It was a sting operation, Brad. The Obsidian chain does not exist. That investor from Dubai was a senior partner at my firm. And that $5 million wire transfer you authorized this morning using company funds, it did not go to a crypto exchange. It went directly into an evidence holding account controlled by the FBI." An officer stepped forward, pulling Brad's arms behind his back. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. "Bradley Thomas Miller, you are under arrest for bigamy, wire fraud, and embezzlement," the officer recited. "You have the right to remain silent." Brad struggled against the cuffs, his face turning red. "This is a mistake," he shouted, spitting as he spoke. "You cannot do this. I am a partner in this company. You are a fraud," I said, stepping closer until I was just out of reach. "You are nothing. And now everyone knows it." As the officers began to drag him toward the exit, Brad stopped struggling. He looked around the room at the shocked faces of the elite he had tried so hard to impress. He looked at my father slumped in his chair, broken. He looked at my mother, who was clutching her chest, gasping for air. And then he looked at Chantel, who was watching him with a mixture of heartbreak and hatred. He started to laugh. It was a high, manic sound that made everyone flinch. "You think you are better than me?" he yelled, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You are all idiots, every single one of you. You were so desperate to believe the lie. You wanted to be special so bad you let me walk right in the front door." He looked at my father. "You knew, Marcus. You knew the numbers did not add up, but you were too proud to ask. You let me rob you blind because you liked having a white son-in-law to show off at the club. You did this to yourself." The officers shoved him forward, forcing him through the doors. But his voice trailed back, mocking and cruel. "You deserve this," he screamed, as he was dragged into the night. "You are a family of fools." The doors swung shut, leaving a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. The gala was over. The empire had fallen. And standing in the wreckage, I was the only one left standing tall. The heavy doors clicked shut behind Brad, leaving a vacuum of silence in the ballroom that was heavier than the humid Georgia air outside. The show was over, but the reckoning was not. My father sat slumped in his chair behind the podium, a man hollowed out by his own greed. He looked small. He looked like a child waiting for a punishment he knew he could not escape. My mother Beatrice stood up. Her hands were trembling not with sorrow, but with the terrifying realization that her shield had just been shattered. She looked at Marcus, then she looked at the FBI agents who were now turning their attention toward the stage. And then she looked at me. For a moment, I saw the calculation in her eyes. She was running the numbers, assessing her options. She realized she had no leverage. She had no power. All she had was biology. She smoothed her dress and walked toward me. Her face transformed. The sneer of the wicked stepmother vanished, replaced by the trembling chin of a martyr. She reached out her hands, palms up, beseeching. "Nia," she said, her voice cracking perfectly. "Baby, please, look at what is happening. This has gone too far." I did not move. I did not step back. I let her come close enough to smell her expensive perfume, the scent of denial and money. "We are family. Nia," she whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. "Your father, he is an old man. He has high blood pressure. You know he does. If they take him to jail, it will kill him. You cannot do that to your own flesh and blood." She reached for my hand, trying to clasp it in hers. I let her take it. Her skin was cold and clammy. "We can fix this," she continued, sensing a hesitation that did not exist. "We can pay the money back. We can sell the summer house. We can make it right. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized the transfers. Please, Nia. For me. For the family. Tacho bo kondi. Spare your father." I looked down at our joined hands. I looked at the diamond bracelet on her wrist that cost more than my entire college education. I looked at the woman who had birthed me and then spent 30 years trying to make me feel like a mistake. Family. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "That is a funny word coming from you, Mom, because I have a very good memory." I pulled my hand away from hers, slowly, deliberately, as if touching something unclean. Where was this family when I was 22 and eating instant noodles in a studio apartment with no heat because you cut me off for choosing accounting over marriage? I asked, my voice low and lethal. Where was this family when I was sick with pneumonia and you told me to take a taxi to the urgent care because you had a hair appointment? Beatrice flinched, but she kept the act up. "That was tough love, Nia. We wanted you to be strong." "Tough love?" I laughed, a harsh sound that made the guests nearby recoil. "No, Mom. Tough love is teaching a child to swim. You threw me in the ocean and hoped I would drown, so you would not have to deal with me." I took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look at the scar on my chin from the time I fell off my bike and she told me to stop crying because I was ruining her lunch. "Where were you 3 days ago when you put my belongings in trash bags and kicked me out on the street?" I asked. Where was the family then? Did you think about my blood pressure? Did you think about where I would sleep? No. You filmed it for your followers. You laughed. Nia. That was different, she stammered. We were under stress, Brad said. Brad is in handcuffs, I interrupted. And Marcus is next. You do not get to play the mother card now, Beatrice. That card expired a long time ago. You made your choice. You chose the golden child. You chose the image. You chose the money. I pointed at my father, who was now weeping silently, his head in his hands. He stole from his employees, I said, my voice rising so everyone could hear. He stole from the people who built this company. He mortgaged Grandpa's house to pay a loan shark. That is not a mistake. That is a lifestyle. And you knew. You enjoyed the fruits of that poison tree every single day. Beatrice's face hardened, the mask slipping. You ungrateful witch. You should have what I challenged. Loved me. Protected me. It is too late for should-haves. I turned away from her, dismissing her as completely as she had dismissed me my entire life. I looked at Agent Miller, who was waiting patiently by the edge of the stage. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. I looked at my father one last time. I felt a twinge of something in my chest. Pity, sadness, but not hesitation. He had made his bed with stolen sheets, and now he had to lie in it. I nodded at the agent. Do it, I said. Agent Miller signaled his team. 2 agents moved up the stairs toward the podium. My mother screamed a raw, ugly sound of total defeat as they pulled Marcus Brooks to his feet and turned him around. The sound of another pair of handcuffs clicking shut signaled the end of the dynasty. Beatrice lunged for me, her nails curved into claws, but Mr. Sterling stepped in between us, his broad back a wall of protection I had never had before. It is over, Beatrice, he said firmly. Go home, while you still have one. I watched as they led my father away, past the ice sculptures, melting into puddles, past the uneaten cake, past the shocked faces of the people he had tried so hard to impress. I did not look away. I bore witness. This was the funeral of my childhood, and I was the one holding the shovel. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting tight around my father's wrists echoed through the ballroom like a gavel strike ending a life sentence. Marcus Brooks. The man who had walked into this room as a king was now bent over the podium, his face pressed against the wood he had just used to lie to the world. Agent Miller did not handle him gently. There was no professional courtesy for a man who stole from the working class to fund a socialite lifestyle. Miller jerked him upright, spinning him around so the cameras could get a good look at the disgrace. Marcus Brooks, you are under arrest for tax evasion, wire fraud, and grand larceny concerning the misappropriation of the M&B Logistics Pension Fund. Miller announced, his voice flat and bored. We also have a warrant for mortgage fraud related to the property at 42 Magnolia Lane. You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it. My father did not remain silent. He thrashed against the restraint, his eyes wild and bloodshot, locking onto me with a hatred that burned hotter than the stage lights. He looked at the investors who were filming him with their phones. He looked at the bankers who were already on calls to liquidate his assets. And then he looked at me, the daughter he had tossed a coin to just days ago. I nurtured a viper, he spat, his voice cracking with self-pity. I gave you everything. I put a roof over your head. I paid for your school. And this is how you repay me, by destroying your own blood. I raised a snake in my bosom. The room went quiet, waiting for my reaction. My mother was wailing in the background, a low keen of mourning for her social status, but I tuned her out. I walked up to my father until I was close enough to see the sweat dripping down his temple. I did not flinch. I did not look away. No, Dad. I said, my voice calm, lethal, and loud enough for every witness to hear. You did not raise a snake. You raised a wolf. I pointed a finger at Chantel, who was huddled on the floor clutching the hem of her ruined dress. You fed her. You spoiled her. You let her devour everything in her path because she was pretty, and she knew how to smile for the camera. I stepped closer, my eyes boring into his. And while you were feeding the wolf, you starved the lion. You thought if you gave me nothing, if you kept me hungry, I would wither away. You thought I would beg. But you forgot what hunger does to a lion, Dad. It does not kill them. It makes them learn how to hunt. I leaned in, whispering the final blow. And now the lion is grown, and she has come for her share. Marcus slumped in the agent's grip, the fight draining out of him as the truth of my words settled in. He had created his own executioner. Agent Miller nodded to his partner, and they began to march him toward the exit. The crowd parted not out of respect, but out of a desperate need to avoid contamination. No one wanted to be seen standing next to the man who had just been exposed as a fraud. But the nightmare for my family was not over, Mr. Sterling stepped up to the microphone, his expression grim. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "this property along with the Brooks family estate and all associated assets has been seized under federal forfeiture laws pending the investigation. This building is now a crime scene. I must ask everyone to vacate the premises immediately. The marshals are sealing the doors in 10 minutes. The panic was instant. The gala guests rushed for the exits, trampling the expensive floral arrangements in their haste to escape the scandal. But for my mother and Chantel, the reality was far worse. Beatrice grabbed Sterling's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "What do you mean seized? We live there. My clothes are there. My jewelry. Where are we supposed to go?" Sterling gently but firmly removed her hand. "I suggest you find a hotel, Mrs. Brooks, though I would advise against using any credit cards linked to the company or your husband. Those have already been deactivated." Chantel looked up from the floor, her mascara running in black rivers down her face. "You cannot do this," she screamed at me. "I have nowhere to go." Brad took the car keys. "I do not have my wallet. Nia, you cannot leave us on the street." I looked at them, my mother shivering in her sequins, my sister barefoot and broken. They looked like refugees from a planet of entitlement that had just exploded. I pulled the silver dollar from my pocket and flipped it in the air, catching it with a sharp snap. "You have $12 million in your imagination, Chantel," I said, turning my back on them. "Spend it wisely." I walked out of the ballroom, flanked by Sterling and the agents leaving them screaming my name. Outside, the night air was cool and sweet. I watched from the curb as federal marshals slapped bright orange evidence tape across the doors of the hotel ballroom. Then I watched as they did the same to the black SUV my parents had arrived in. My mother and sister stumbled out onto the sidewalk a few minutes later. They stood there under the streetlights, looking lost and small, their expensive gowns looking ridiculous against the grit of the Atlanta pavement. They reached for their phones to call for a car, but I saw the moment they realized their accounts were frozen. They stared at their screens in horror, tapping furiously to no avail. I got into the back of my own car. "Drive," I told the driver. As we pulled away, I saw them standing on the curb arguing with a taxi driver who was refusing to take them without cash. The empire had not just fallen, it had been evicted. 7 days after the gala imploded, my life had returned to a quiet, rhythmic precision, but my mother and sister were living in a chaotic hell of their own making. I sat in my office overlooking the Atlanta skyline, drinking coffee that tasted like victory, while my private investigator updated me on their current living situation. They were no longer at the Ritz. They were not at the estate. They were currently residents of the Starlight Motor Inn, a roadside motel on the outskirts of the city, known mostly for its hourly rates and vending machine dinners. The fall had been absolute. The federal marshals had seized the estate within 24 hours. The bank had frozen every personal account linked to my father, including the supplementary credit cards my mother used to maintain her delusions of grandeur. The investigator told me the final blow had landed this morning. A tow truck had spotted the white Range Rover parked outside the motel. It was leased through the company, so it was technically evidence. Chantel had apparently screamed so loud when they hooked it up that the motel manager threatened to evict them right then and there. My phone rang on my desk. It was an unknown number. I knew who it was. Their cell service had been cut off yesterday, along with their dignity. They were likely calling from the sticky phone in the motel lobby, or a prepaid burner bought with the last of their cash. I let it ring 3 times, watching the numbers flash on the screen. I could have let it go to voicemail. I could have blocked it. But I needed to hear it. I needed to hear the sound of reality finally hitting home. I pressed the speaker button. "Hello?" I said, my voice calm and professional, as if I were answering a client inquiry. "You evil little witch." My mother voice scratched through the speaker, distorted by static and rage. "You froze the accounts. You froze everything. I tried to buy a sandwich at the gas station and the card was declined." "Do you hear me, Nia?" "Declined. I am Beatrice Brooks. I do not get declined." "You are Beatrice Brooks, the wife of a man under federal indictment for embezzlement," I corrected her gently. "And those cards were paid for by the stolen pension funds of truck drivers. You are lucky you are not in a cell next to him, Mom. The feds are still deciding if you were a co-conspirator or just a beneficiary of the fraud. I would keep a low profile if I were you." "Do not you dare speak to me like that," she shrieked. "Fix this, Nia. Call the bank. Tell them you authorize the release of funds. We need cash. We need a hotel room that does not smell like bleach and despair. Chantel is having a panic attack. She cannot live like this." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the city below. "Chantel can get a job," I said. "I hear the Starlight is looking for housekeeping staff. She has experience cleaning up messes, right? Or maybe she just creates them." There was a scuffling sound on the other end, and then Chantel's voice came on. It sounded wet and thick with tears, but the entitlement was still there, sharp as broken glass. "You think this is funny, Nia? You think it is funny to see us suffering? I have nothing. Brad ruined everything and now you are kicking us while we are down. I need money. I need $5,000 just to get us into a decent place and buy some clothes. Send it to me, now. Or I swear I will go to the press and tell them you stole the company from Dad." "Go ahead," I challenged. "Tell the press. Tell them how you and your husband tried to defraud the company with a fake crypto scheme. Tell them about the bigamy. Tell them about the forged will." "I have the receipts, Chantel. I have everything. The only thing the press will be interested in is your mugshot if you try to cross me again." The anger on the other end suddenly evaporated, replaced by a hollow, terrified silence. They realized the threats were empty. They realized they had no cards left to play. The bluster drained away, leaving only the pathetic reality of their situation. "Nia, please." My mother's voice came back on, but it was different now. It was small. It was the voice of a woman who had just watched her last lifeline snap. "We are hungry. We have nowhere to go. Your father is in jail. We are all alone. Please, baby. Just a little money. Just enough to get by until this blows over. We are your family. You cannot leave us here." I closed my eyes for a second, remembering the day I graduated college. I remembered asking my father for help with a deposit on my first apartment so I would not have to live in a dangerous neighborhood. I remembered him laughing and telling me that struggle builds character. I remembered my mother telling me that if I wanted a nice place, I should have found a rich husband like Chantel was planning to do. I opened my eyes. The pity I might have felt was gone, burned away by the memory of my own struggle. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Family helps family. And the best help I can give you is the same lesson Dad gave me." "What are you talking about?" Beatrice whimpered. "I am talking about independence," I said. "You have hands, Mom. You have feet. You are able-bodied women. There are plenty of places hiring. Fast food restaurants, retail stores, cleaning services. They pay minimum wage, but it is money." "Nia, you cannot be serious," Chantel sobbed. "I am deadly serious," I replied. "Dad told me to go earn my own. He told me to build my own empire." "Well, I did. And now it is your turn. Go earn your own dinner. Go earn your own rent. Welcome to the real world. I reached out and pressed the end call button, severing the connection. The silence that filled the room wasn't empty. It was full of peace. I blocked the number, then I picked up my pen and went back to work. There was still a company to save, and I didn't have time for people who refused to save themselves. I stood on the front porch of 42 Magnolia Lane, holding a cashier check that felt heavier than the paper it was printed on. The neon foreclosure sticker was gone, scraped away by my own fingernails, leaving a sticky residue on the wood. The loan shark had tried to play hardball, claiming the interest had compounded, but Mr. Sterling had reminded him that lending money against a property involved in an active federal fraud investigation was a fantastic way to get his own operations audited by the FBI. The shark took the principal amount and vanished. I unlocked the door. The air inside smelled of dust and neglect, but underneath that it smelled like cedar and old books. It smelled like my childhood. I walked through the empty rooms, touching the walls. I wasn't just buying a building. I was buying back my grandfather's dignity. The next stop was the corporate headquarters. The glass walls didn't feel cold anymore. They felt transparent. I called a town hall meeting in the main warehouse. 300 drivers, logistics coordinators, and warehouse staff stood there looking tired and scared. They had seen the news. They knew Marcus was in jail. They thought the company was dissolving and their pensions were gone forever. I stood on a pallet crate, not a podium. I didn't give a speech about synergy or corporate restructuring. I held up a wire transfer confirmation. Every cent my father stole from your retirement fund has been returned, I told them, my voice echoing off the corrugated metal roof. Plus interest paid from the liquidation of his personal assets. Your futures are safe. The silence that followed wasn't fearful. It was the silence of people realizing they could breathe again. Then the cheering started. It shook the floorboards. I didn't smile for the cameras or the shareholders. I smiled for the old man in the back row who had been driving for this company since before I was born. I didn't stop there. I ordered the sign crews to tear down the M&B Logistics branding from every truck in the fleet. M&B stood for Marcus and Beatrice. I wasn't going to let those names ride on the highways anymore. By the end of the week, the fleet was repainted. Otis Global Logistics. My grandfather's name was back where it belonged, on the road, providing for families just like he intended. I sat in the CEO's chair, which I had replaced because the old one smelled like my father's cologne and arrogance. I looked out at the skyline. I was not just a forensic accountant anymore. I was the architect of a new era. While I was rebuilding the family honor, the rest of the family was busy destroying what little dignity they had left. I received a call from the manager of a high-end grocery store in Buckhead. He wasn't calling to offer me a corporate discount. He was calling because he had detained a woman trying to walk out with 3 bottles of vintage wine and a wheel of imported truffle cheese stuffed into her oversized purse. It was Chantel. She had tried to play the "Do you know who I am" card, but nobody knew who she was anymore. She was just a woman in a stained designer dress stealing luxury goods because she refused to lower herself to buying bread. I told the manager to follow standard procedure. I didn't bail her out. I let her experience the booking process. It was the first time in her life she faced a consequence I didn't cushion. My mother's fate was even more poetic. I had signed a new contract with a commercial cleaning service for the headquarters as part of my overhaul of vendor relations. One evening I was working late reviewing the quarterly projections when the cleaning crew came in to empty the trash. I heard a familiar voice complaining about the quality of the paper towels in the break room. I looked up. There, pushing a gray cart filled with cleaning supplies, was Beatrice. She was wearing a blue uniform with her name stitched on the pocket. She froze when she saw me sitting behind the desk she used to lean on while demanding money. The woman who had mocked my career, who had thrown my grandmother's quilt into a puddle, was now emptying my shredder bin. She didn't scream. She didn't demand I fix it. The shame was a physical weight pushing her shoulders down. She looked at me. Then she looked down at her comfortable orthopedic shoes, the kind she used to make fun of maids for wearing. She pushed her cart out of the room without saying a word. It wasn't cruelty. It was gravity. She had finally landed in the reality she had spent her life avoiding. I watched her go, and then I turned back to my work. The ledger was finally balanced. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy and respectful, like the world is holding its breath. I walked across the manicured grass, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the branches of the ancient oak trees. I found the marker easily. It was simple granite, unpretentious and solid, just like the man buried beneath it. Otis Brooks. The name meant something again in this city. It meant integrity. It meant a promise kept. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and my fingers closed around the cold metal of the silver dollar. It had been with me through everything. It had been in my pocket when my father threw me out of the boardroom. It had been there when I found the foreclosure notice. It had been there when I walked into the gala and watched their world fall apart. It was heavy with history. I knelt down in the grass, not caring about the stains on my tailored suit. I placed the coin gently on the top of the headstone. It sat there gleaming in the sunlight, a tiny silver monument to the truth. "You told me to go earn my own, Grandpa," I whispered, the wind catching my words and carrying them away. "You knew exactly what they would do. You knew Marcus would lose his way, and you knew Chantel would never find hers. You gave me this coin, not because it was money, but because it was a test to see if I had the strength to walk away and the courage to come back." I traced the letters of his name with my fingertip. "I didn't just earn my own money, Grandpa." I continued, my voice steady and sure. "I earned back your honor. The trucks are running on time again. The pension fund is full. The drivers look me in the eye and shake my hand because they know I am not stealing their future to buy a lifestyle I didn't earn. I cleaned the house, Grandpa. I swept out the dust and the rot. I stood up, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying since I was a child. The burden of being the scapegoat, the invisible daughter, the disappointment was gone. It was buried here in the ground with the only man who had ever truly seen me. I turned and walked back toward the gravel path where my car was parked. It wasn't a company car. It wasn't a leased luxury vehicle meant to impress strangers. It was mine, bought and paid for with the salary I earned as a forensic accountant. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was warm from the sun. I started the engine and the dashboard lit up. My phone was resting in the center console, connected to the system. As the engine purred to life, a notification banner slid down the screen. It was from the folder I had labeled spam. The sender was Beatrice. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Even from the depths of her new reality, pushing a cleaning cart and living in a motel, she was still trying, still reaching out. Not to apologize, not to ask how I was, but to see if there was any juice left in the orange, any way to manipulate the situation one last time. The message preview was short, just 3 words, desperate and hollow. "We are family." I looked at those words and felt a strange sense of detachment. It was like looking at a specimen in a jar, something that used to be alive, but was now just a curiosity. "We share blood, Mom," I thought, "but we do not share a family. Family protects you. Family builds you up. You tore me down brick by brick, and then got mad when I used the rubble to build a fortress you couldn't get into." I reached out and pressed the delete button. The message vanished. Then I went a step further. I opened the settings and permanently deleted the entire folder. There was no room in my life for spam anymore. Not digital and not emotional. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the cemetery gates. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the Atlanta skyline in brilliant strokes of violet and gold. The road ahead was wide open. I rolled down the windows, letting the warm air rush in, tangling my hair. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me worth seeing. Only ghosts and the ruins of a kingdom that deserved to fall. I smiled. It wasn't a cold smile or a vengeful smile. It was the smile of a woman who had walked through the fire and came out holding the torch. I drove toward the city, toward my company, toward my future. The lion was fed, the territory was secure, and for the first time in my life, I was completely and utterly free. If you enjoyed watching a toxic dynasty crumble, and justice being served exactly as it should be, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of reclamation and revenge. Let me know in the comments if you would have given them a second chance, or if you would have done exactly what I did. Until next time, remember that the best revenge isn't just success, it is peace. This story illustrates that true power isn't inherited, it is earned through resilience and integrity. While Nia's family chased status through deceit, she quietly built undeniable competence. The pain of being the scapegoat became her greatest asset, forcing her to develop the strength and independence that eventually saved her grandfather's legacy. It teaches us that toxic family dynamics rely on silence and compliance, but truth is the ultimate disruptor. You do not owe loyalty to those who mistreat you. Real success is walking away from toxicity with your head held high, knowing your value was never defined by them. If you believe in standing up for yourself against toxic family, hit like and subscribe for more stories of justice served.